the opposite of my mom. That's me. They couldn't wait for school to start.
We'll try to make it work.
Oh.
Yeah.
Panic of my older one going to college.
You haven't done it, man.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on the air. Welcome to the council work session. Adjourn will be joining us for the regular session, but we'll catch up to this one online. And with that, I'll turn it over to Judge Graves to give us a municipal court update.
Good evening. I'm going to admit that there's not a lot of change going on in court, which is maybe a good thing that we're sort of plugging along as things should be without any big bumps in the road. Volume is up for sure. We're seeing a lot more people in the afternoon. Generally the numbers are up, but then I think also just the number of people showing up seems like there's a lot more people showing up than there were an increase in the numbers, if that makes sense. So we've had quite a few people there. We're still getting done within the time frame. We're still done by 5 o'clock, so we're not back to 10 years ago when we were here until 6 and 6:30 trying to get through the docket. So there's a good balance there. We're definitely up. And we're seeing a lot more people set cases for trial. I don't know what that is. And it's kind of right out of the gate. They show up. I've told everybody their rights. I've told everybody their options, and they just walk up to the table and say, I want a trial. So not a lot of discussion. I try if it's something that seems like might not want to go to trial. Maybe you don't understand what you're asking for. I'll often just read them the law and say, hey, okay, if you want to go to trial, this is what the issue will be at trial. Like if it's no insurance and they want to go to trial, I figure it's usually easier to deal with those because if you didn't have insurance, let's just deal with it today. Instead of going to trial where we're going to find out that you didn't have insurance. So I'll often read them the law and say, if you didn't get it, we can do something now. But for the most part, we're finding people setting a lot of cases for trial.
And is that just rolling the dice that the officer won't show or something?
I have heard that from a few. So I don't know if that's just kind of circulating information at the moment, is that if you set it for trial, maybe the officer won't show up. Because I think I heard that from at least 2 last court session. Well, what are the chances the officer won't show up? My answer is usually I've been here 10 years. I think it's happened 3 times.
Mhm.
We might be at 4 at this point. I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Easier in a bigger city.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've said that too. I said, you might have heard that that happens if you're in Portland, right? I said, but we're talking about a small city. It's not gonna be the case. I do think one woman actually still said, well, I'm gonna roll the dice and see. But yeah, the trials have definitely been up. So our mornings have been very busy. Last court session, we were setting all the way out to October for trials. So,
Wow.
Can you, just to back up a little bit, can you remind me the times that you're in court? How frequently, what days? It sounds like is there a morning and afternoon as well session?
so-
So could you just give me a little background?
the second and fourth Wednesday,
Second and fourth Wednesday.
and we usually start with trials from 9 till 12, and we
Okay.
do them every 15 minutes.
Okay.
Unless there's occasionally folks who've either been here before or we know that there's going to be an issue, so we've set a little bit more time, but generally every 15 minutes
Okay.
from 9 to noon. And then we start again at 1:30 with 1:30 to 2 are the folks who were here before, and I maybe said, if you go get the insurance and come back, then I can change this violation to something that's not going to have as big of an impact.
Okay.
So those are the 1:30 to 2 o'clock folks, and then 2, 2:30, and 3 are traffic tickets, and 3:30 are parking tickets.
And is traffic and parking pretty much all? Or do you probably do some code some
Codes
code
are kinda slipped in there.
violations or whatever?
Yeah.
All right. And when you said that the numbers are up, well, you said that, I think what I understood you say is the attendance is up, even if the number of citations is not extremely up. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, that I feel like the attendance is up more than the number of citations are
Yeah,
up.
okay.
But the number of citations are
Are
up too.
also up as well. Okay. And you don't really know why that's happening
No.
necessarily?
And it's not, sometimes I would say, well, it's a lot of really angry people, right? Like people are really upset, so and it doesn't seem to be that. It just seems to be across the board. We're just having more people show up. And I don't feel like there's more people saying, I can't pay, that's why I'm here, I needed, a payment plan, or folks showing up with any particular reason. And if they have that, they're not expressing it.
What was the day of the week again? Second?
Wednesday.
Wednesday?
Yep.
And did you always just do 2 Wednesdays, or did you start doing every Wednesday when you
When
first?
I first started, we did 3 Wednesdays a month.
3 Wednesdays, okay.
I would say that was probably only for the first 2 years, maybe.
Yeah,
I'm not even sure if we got through my first contract, still doing 3,
okay,
because of the change with photo radar that took place right around.
yeah.
When I started, it moved from being on McLaughlin all the time
Mhm.
to being off in the neighborhoods. So that dropped the numbers, and then it was a few years later that it was stopped completely, so.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was maybe the first 2 years that we did it 3 days a month.
And how does the flow go in this building? Is it better? Is it different? I mean, I know it's different.
Right.
Was
There's-
there a benefit to having it on a different floor in the other building?
I don't know that I noticed much of a difference. They're scanning people downstairs. That's their first spot where they're checking people. And then they send them upstairs and keep everyone in the lobby. They get their check-in. When they check in, they get a paper that the security then brings in to Mary so she can check them in on the computer. And then they send them in groups. So it seems to be flowing pretty well. And then when we're done, I'm sending them out to the window to check out. I haven't heard if there's a problem with the flow at the window since we've had the increase in numbers. Is it? Seems to be working. Since everyone has to check out at the window before they go.
How's the security situation?
It feels improved, I think.
Okay.
We usually have, I have 1 or 2 in here. I guess we just have 1 in here, but they do kind of change out frequently, so it often feels like we have 2 in here.
I was gonna say, there's one out here in the lobby.
There's 1 in the
right,
lobby
as well as
there,
downstairs.
that's 1 downstairs.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's funny, I've come up forgetting that it's Wednesday. I'm like, oh, yeah. And the guy, guy looks at me, I'm like, no, I'm going to my office.
Yeah, and I know they've made some changes at the security company, and feel like they've improved their staff as well. The professionalism of their staff, maybe across the board. So that's felt good.
So maybe a related question. I've seen the police motorcycle a bit more often, so they focus on traffic enforcement. Was that changed or is that?
That was it. So we hired Robbie Nashiff, who is, I think, we call it the Robbie Nashiff effect when you can see our traffic citations. So that has brought our traffic enforcement capacity back up to where we wanted it to be.
Right.
Actually, I think there's still more demand that we could be doing, but that additional staff capacity is a significant driver behind the increased number of citations coming to court.
I thought that might be the case. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, when the staffing was down, I mean, we definitely know the amount of resources they could put on traffic was always kind of the first thing
First
to
to go.
cut.
To go.
But when they get back up to fuller staffing, then we get more resources on that, which is great. Which is great, because I see red light running still. And I do think, I just came from Milwaukie Marketplace, I do think we have some issues with the traffic flow around there now that we have.
At the marketplace?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
We have
Between
traffic.
the apartments, between the apartments and the marketplace, I'm surprised.
The intersection gets confused because I live by there, so like when one that way doesn't have a stop sign,
Yeah,
the ones going east and west that do, there's a lot of confusion.
Oh,
Stop.
where 7 acres is, you mean, or whatever? Yeah.
That
Mhm.
just, you know, and
Oh,
the
that
railroad,
intersection?
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's confusing.
and the train doesn't help.
Well, and then the number of people on 37th going
Yeah.
to 224, that has always been a bad intersection where International Way comes in there and
Oh,
you
yeah.
have those
Yes.
funky little
Oh, my God.
curbs and a really short lane, but it used to not have that much traffic, except maybe at shift change and on International Way, but now it's got a regular flow with no
Game of
apartments and
chicken
stuff.
choice in that
This
intersection.
conversation always goes to traffic.
Wow, yeah.
The traffic flow of the conversation.
Pardon us.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I've definitely seen the Nash effect.
He's a lovely guy too, but he's out there on the motorcycle a lot.
I have a question.
Careful,
Yeah.
man.
One, when you said that there's been an increase in the request for trials, I assume that very few of these are represented folks.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I also assume, I always wanted to come to one of these and I never have
Oh.
gotten there to see how it's just in operation. But is it, when you do have a trial, pretty informal? I mean, are they showing you their phone and that kind of stuff? Because I've heard from my friends who are judges that the informality has increased dramatically over time with witnesses and stuff. I mean, they were used to like, a more rigid courtroom and now it's, especially in the family law areas and things of that nature, it's, well, let me show you the text he sent me and they run up to that kind of stuff.
Oh.
You don't see that kind of informality?
No, I would say I try to keep it low stress but formal.
Okay, got
Right.
you.
So usually what I tell folks, and it's in the letter that's sent out to them, that I can't look at your phone. I have to have something I can put in my file, is what I tell them. It's if you're going to appeal this case, that judge has to be able to see everything that I saw. And so don't give me your phone unless you want it to go in my file. And so there's information on there as to how they can email exhibits in prior to court, so that we'll have them if they have digital exhibits, or they can bring paper in.
Okay.
But because we're a court of record, because it's going to go to the Court of Appeals, it's not going to be a de novo, down at circuit court. I make sure that the file reflects exactly what I saw.
Got you. Thank you.
So no, my neighbor Bill says this and here's his statement, not coming in.
Okay. And
Oh, it's not intimidating though, right? Either. It's not like
I don't think so. I mean, I talked at my daughter's school the other day and the contrast was hilarious to me because the other attorney that was there I've known since before our children were born. And we are both municipal court judges. And he is very much the intimidating guy. And I thought, it made me chuckle to say, we both have the same job, but you're going to get two very different personalities because I don't want it to be uncomfortable. Even if you lose, I want you to leave here feeling like you were heard. And I don't want to scare people away from participating in the process.
I
So,
appreciate that. That's the biggest thing.
yeah, it's,
Get people to not want to participate.
and I try to tell them that when somebody asks for a trial, that I'm saying, you're gonna have a trial about your vehicle registration? I mean, all we have to do is look at the license plate, right? Like,
Yeah.
and try to walk them through, like, you have a right to have a trial, whether your license, whether it was expired or not. You've got the right. Let's talk about the practicality,
I appreciate that
right?
very much.
And even though you started by saying there's not really a lot of change, maybe or update, do you have any recommendations or anything that you see that the city could help you with, or city council? Is there anything that or is the program just running along so smoothly that it's all great?
I mean, sort of, right? It's sort of running along smoothly, and what else would we do? Mary's working on some ways to make things more accessible, right? We've got online payments and things of that sort, but, maybe some reminders that some courts send out, hey, you need to be in court this day. Just things that help people get here
Okay.
more frequently. So we're sending out less you missed court letters, and people are actually just showing up to court. Or payment reminders, which again is fewer cases going to collections. So things that make it more accessible to everyone. I think myself and my own forgetfulness that getting that text message would get me to court, which would just start a better process than, oh, I forgot, and now I'm
Right.
trying to get caught up. So working on some of those things. I'm not sure that there's anything.
Nothing major
That we
jumping out at
need.
you. Okay.
So we did amnesty for a few years. But we aren't doing it, I guess, the last couple of years, or do we, is that because?
Didn't we do one in 2023?
No, I think it was 2022 was the last time.
Okay. When did we change collection agencies?
Last year.
Last year.
Yeah.
So there was a big change with switching collection companies. And I think probably getting through kind of that process put amnesty on hold for last year. Because we were pulling cases back from them regardless. Just trying to get kind of everything switched from one place to another. So there wasn't as much need for the amnesty because we were holding all the cases. But we can certainly do it. I think if you look at the statistics, the response from all the people we've sent it out to, we've gotten what response we're going to get, right?
So I kind of had that feeling the last year we did it. Yeah, it was sort of like diminishing returns on it.
Yeah, because we're looking at cases that are 4 or 5 years out, and so really we've only gained another year or so. So I don't think that the response, though, in the however many years we did it in the latter years, was actually quite as much. So we might delay another year and then try it again and see if we get more response. There was also the governor's permission order, which has been a lot of fun to work through. You get through a list and then they send a new list, which I know Mary spent a lot of time on just getting those all ticked off of the books, basically. So that was sort of an amnesty without our,
Yeah.
us doing it. We had a gentleman in here the other day that I was so excited for him. He had 3 tickets. He had the lengthy driving record, but had nothing in the last few years. And he was working really hard, and we looked and he was on our list and he had 2 other courts. And I said, you need to call those courts, right? Like, he's like, well, I'm trying to set up payment. I'm like, don't set up a payment plan. Call them and say, am I on your list? And I said, I'll set your case out and you come back. And, because he of course had a new ticket, which is what he was there on, but he had other stuff. And he came back, he's like, I have a driver's license. For the first time in forever, he's like, yeah, I was on the other list. And when I called them, they took care of it. And I've got a driver's license.
Has such an impact on job and maybe just your whole
Right?
thing.
Yeah. So that made it getting people,
Okay.
Well, I know you don't have the criminal cases under you, but I think next week in our study session, we have Clackamas Workforce Partnership coming, and they
Oh,
have
yeah.
one of the clean your record.
Expungement clinics, too.
Expungement programs, so we're gonna be hearing probably a little bit about that next week, so.
I have them on my list to volunteer with. I've cleared it with the bar that I'm allowed to do it. The timing during the school year has not worked, but I'm hoping to be there over the summer. And I had to clear it with the bar because I said, what if it's a case that is out of this court? And apparently it's a limited duration, or limited scope clinic. And so they said I can do it.
All right.
It's not a conflict of any kind. So. But yeah, who's coming to talk? Do you know?
Bridget Daisy, the
Okay.
head of the workforce partnership, and she's bringing 1 or 2 people with her, but I don't know who else she's bringing.
Amanda, I think, is who I've been talking with, and I think she runs the clinics.
Well, they're coming to talk about sort of a menu of programs that they have. That's just one of them, but so it's not going to be focused on that, but
Cool.
anyway.
Yeah, I think they do good stuff. I'm trying to get them for the judges conference in September to see if they'll come and talk about all the options they have, because the judges need to know where we can say, hey, if you go talk to these folks, you might get some help.
Yeah.
And then this ticket becomes less of an issue when you've got a job or you've got housing or you're not struggling to pay, for utilities or a phone, all those things. So,
Great.
that's all I have.
I just have one question, Judge Graves. As the interpreter started, the once a month Spanish interpreter,
Yes.
and how's that been? Has that been utilized pretty well?
Yes.
Great.
You reminded me of the issue we have.
Huh? Sorry.
We have had a very hard time with interpreters, not the in-person. The in-person is fantastic. The phone service we've been trying to use has been a challenge.
Okay.
And I don't know that there's any options as far as phone interpreting. But getting someone on the phone who can do the job has been a challenge.
And so it's like the availability of someone, or is it like the technology, or is it all of the above?
Right. I don't know if technologically, Mary's got it set up correctly. It comes through the speakers
Okay.
and they can, for the most part, hear us.
Mhm.
I don't know if it's just the service. We'll call and they'll tell, 3 different times, that code's not right, that code's not right.
Oh,
And then you get in and they say, it's this department, but we need to send you to that.
that's
Wow.
Yes, even though it's using the same code each time and
Okay.
calling the same number
Yeah.
each time.
Okay.
Well, that might be worth
Good to
looking
know.
into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know AT&T has a translation line. I don't know what all the other options are, but.
That's language line we've been using. Okay.
Yeah.
So do we have, you said that there's an in-person, is like the in-person Spanish and then the other languages because it's less, probably, is that what
Yeah.
the language line is? What do you find, is Russian probably put up there? Like, what are the other ones? that are used?
Ukrainian has
Ukrainian?
been, I think what we've used most recently, right? Ukrainian quite a bit.
Uh-huh,
There was Russian, Arabic,
Arabic,
um,
what?
yes, Chukis. We have one gentleman who speaks Chukis.
I don't know what that is, what is
It's
it?
from Micronesia.
Oh, okay.
But we've managed to find an interpreter for him most of the time when he's come in. He's been a frequent visitor. We've been working hard to get him some stability. But Ukrainian, I think, has been the most popular recently. And I felt the gentleman the other day appeared sort of hesitant to ask for an interpreter. Like, it was just on him. He felt uncomfortable. And so then when we have to go through this tree and we're getting disconnected, having to ask again, and it just looked like to him that it was a hassle, right? And
It was.
right, it was a hassle, but it wasn't a hassle because of him. It
Yeah,
was a
right.
hassle because of the service.
Mhm.
And so I feel bad when someone is here trying to access the system and we can't get through to an interpreter for
Yeah.
them in a way that makes it look like this is a routine, easy thing and we're happy to do it.
Yep. Very fair.
And there's no cost to them for any of that, right? I mean, that's sure, okay, good. Oh, that's interesting, maybe we.
Yeah, well, definitely, that's super helpful feedback. I was talking today about adding on a new service with Language Line, and my first question was, well, how is the technology serving us? So this is very timely, and we'll definitely follow up.
Yeah, I don't know what other options there are, but I wouldn't say that we've been happy with the service. it's been a struggle.
But I'm glad the in-person interpretation is working, and I just want to thank you both for advocating for that. I think that's just a great, example of living out our commitment to equity and diversity. So thanks for doing that.
So you try to, they're once a month and you try to schedule all the Spanish speakers on the day they're there?
Yeah, the officers know to cite for the day that we have the interpreter here, if it's someone who speaks Spanish.
And how does that work also with any notices? Are they also in, are our notices all in English? They're all in English currently, nothing's in.
Yeah, I guess we would have to send out like a dual-sided something, or else we're making an assumption on who needs the Spanish version.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking maybe there's something at the bottom in another language that says, if you need further assistance,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, we can certainly add that once we've got an alternate version for them. That's all I have.
Great.
Any other questions from anyone?
I just want to thank Judge Graves, but particularly thank Mary. Mary's here late a lot, just working. The Nashif effect is great. Big toll, and just Mary's doing an amazing job and really, really working her butt off. So we are so grateful to have you, Mary.
Well, thank you both for
Yeah, thank you.
coming today and for all your
Thank you.
work. And, yeah, it's great to get your update and hear about the course.
All right, enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
And Scott is shaping us out now for a discussion of the Kellogg Dam removal project. And I'll just introduce our community development director and acting assistant city manager, Joseph Trujillo, and let him introduce his other.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm just going to do a quick, brief introduction of this agenda item. With us tonight is Neil Schulman from ICWIC, as you know, is the executive director. We also have, thank you for your time, by the way, Dr. King, who's the commissioner for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. Several months ago, we were at a joint meeting. I think it was actually sponsored by ODFW, but we also, ODOT was there, NICWIC was there, the city was there, and a few other agencies. And I was kind of struck by the updates then, but also from Dr. King's that incorporated a lot more health-related insights and DEI insights into the Kellogg Creek Dam Removal Project. So I wanted to invite them both to provide a quick update on what's been going on, because there has been some movement, some really cool things happening, as well as maybe see a different perspective than you have normally. So with that, I'll let Neil kind of do a quick update.
Sure, yeah, I'll do the quick update. Dr. King is the main show here, and I think it'll spark a lot of interesting discussion. Again, I think I've probably talked with all of you about this project multiple times. So, and as you know, once I get going on it, I can talk the paint off a wall about it if I'm not careful. So I'm going to try and go fairly quickly with just an update on what's going on. And if I can use this correctly. So again, we're kind of basically about to plunge into the next big phase of design. I think there was a meeting probably right before this to work on that. But the project leadership team is really these four entities. It's obviously the city and the Watershed Council and ODOT and the American Rivers. I know most of you have had a chance at various points to meet April McEwen, who is kind of the overall project manager. And we each kind of play different roles in different phases. So we, for instance, the Watershed Council has been contracting phase 1. ODOT will be contracting phase 2. The main thing I always explain, and I had this nervousness kind of way in the early days, is obviously, ODOT knows bridges and roads. They don't necessarily know stream restoration. But all the decisions are made by the four entity leadership team that Joseph represents the city on. So it's it's been a really collaborative process. And I think the full kind of project management capacity of ODOT has been really taken off with this project, where we have people from every discipline. And it's ODOT was a big ship to turn, and like all big ships, once it's moving. So it's got a lot of momentum. Where we are right now. So just again, you've probably all seen this before, but Kellogg Dam blocks 17 miles of stream. It creates a 15-acre impoundment that is not much of a community asset, but will be a new public natural area and an area that has been identified as having poor access to nature. And obviously, Dr. King will be talking a lot about those things. It was built when Abraham Lincoln was a first-term congressman during the Mexican-American War, which I still can't say without cracking up. Could have been removed by one person with a mule and a box of dynamite in the 1890s, but we're doing it now. And this is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to restore a stream across the street from a high school in a city center that achieves a ton of community benefits. We've obviously talked a lot about all the benefits for things like a safer crossing of Highway 99E as Milwaukie Bay Park improvements occur and things like that. To kind of put that in graphic terms, we have a 90-year-old bridge sitting on top of a 178-year-old dam that is obviously earthquake vulnerable, that doesn't have that safe crossing. There is the access to nature, there's the access to tree canopy. We all remember the heat dome, and we all know that impacts people very differently depending on where they are in the social strata. And then, of course, the chance to have connectivity to parks and the trolley trail and things of that sort. And then the other one is a chance to do this kind of project differently. The community engagement part of it and our partnership with both Two Tribes and with Unite Oregon is really a chance to make sure that the voices that are included in these processes are more robust than the folks who usually pay attention to things like technical documents about hyperbaric flow and hydraulic modeling and things like that. So we have a chance to really do that community engagement well. There is, as you know, again, I think you probably also saw this at some point recently, this is conceptual restoration design for the kind of thing it could look like. This is not a full design in the sense of like you might see a squiggle or a meander. We don't know that meander is going to end up there. It might end up somewhere else in the impoundment, but the idea is basically that there is a kind of multi-threaded channel with wetlands throughout most of the impoundment. And then as it gets toward the infrastructure, the trolley trail TriMet bridge, the railroad trellis, the Highway 99E will probably have to kind of condense down to a single channel so that obviously it passes through that infrastructure and that it is backwatered by Willamette River tides. I apologize for the small font, but here's where we are in design status. So we are pushing pretty hard to get that funky looking yellow amphibious barge into the impoundment by hopefully the first to second, like shortly after July 4th is what we're shooting for, basically. So this is to do the sediment sampling. We have a sediment sampling plan that was approved by the Portland Sediment Evaluation Team. We went through a very exciting and lengthy permitting process to do the sediment sampling. It's almost like permitting the whole project. And in that top diagram, you can see all the samples that we'll be taking. So we are taking both, there's about 80 cores. Some of them are geotech to find out. So basically sediment has been accumulating behind the dam since 1848, at least. We need to know what is beneath that so that we can design around that, especially around the railroad trellis, because that was built during World War I, and there's no as-built, so we don't know how deep the footings are and what they're in. So we want to make sure we obviously know that. And then the other cores are, so there's some geotech, and then the other cores are sediment sampling for various chemicals. As you know, there were some ag chemicals used in agriculture in the upper watershed back in that general window between the 30s and the 60s that the sediment sampling that we could do easily by just going out there in the upper impoundment in either waders or a raft kind of did not show anything that was a whole lot different from what's in the bottom of the Willamette River on the other side of the dam. But the sediment is a lot deeper in the lower impoundment, so it's a lot more complicated to sample. And that involves, again, closing Highway 9090 in the middle of the night, lowering a barge off of a crane, having it drive around and do its sampling, taking it out, driving it around to Kronberg, lowering it off in a crane on the other side of the railroad trellis. It is going to be a little bit of a show. And the barge is this amphibious thing that goes in that can, because the water is so shallow in there, and if any of you have tried to quote unquote canoe in there, you know, as soon as you try, your canoe runs aground, and you step out of it and you sink up to your waist, and then you get back in and drag it. So this amphibious barge is able to kind of move around and do that without just spreading around and getting stuck. And that has to come up from California. So this is quite a process. The other thing is that the leadership team was just meeting again to select a contractor for phase 2 design. And in the process of scoring, I think interviews are happening next week for the top firms. I think there were 7 proposals. All of this work is coming out of, obviously, the NOAA Fisheries $15 million grant that was given to the project. And then there's some pre-project monitoring going on. We've been doing eDNA sampling, so when the Willamette gets high, we know where the fish go in the upper watershed. That's interesting and points us towards some other restoration we want to do around the Parmenter Ponds area, especially. And then we are also working with Milwaukie High School and Rao Middle School, who are using a PSU protocol for collecting viable data with school kids to study macroinvertebrates in the impoundment before and after removal. And that's been going full bore, because we're obviously in the final years of the school year, and we'll be continuing that for 3 years at least. So that is the design status. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk recently about fundraising strategy. I know that April and Dr. King were in DC and can probably provide a little bit more of an update on that than I can. April had a whirlwind set of meetings with the delegation and with also some of the folks from the Federal Highway Administration. And then obviously the JPACT trip just happened a couple of weeks ago, and I have not heard an update on that, but it sounds like Mayor Beatty will probably tomorrow. We are going to be submitting a letter of intent either late this week or early next week to Metro. We were asked basically to apply for their large-scale community visions project, which is bond measure money that is potentially up to 10 million. But its significance is probably larger than that if we're successful, because that is not federal money. So when it comes to applying for federal highway money where there is a non-federal match requirement, then we are starting to build that. There's a lot of competitive grant programs, obviously, in the Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act that we're targeting. We are also hoping to work on a congressional appropriation so that we don't have to go through, the 6-month process of waiting to hear on a grant. And then it can be basically, and obviously what happens in various elections and what happens with, where our delegation is positioned is obviously always coming into play with that. The other things we're targeting on a state level is obvious, some of you are probably aware of the Monsanto settlement with the state, and that is creating a pot of money with OWEB that will potentially come online about when we're ready to, with a cost of, a full construction cost estimate. And we've also been in discussions, Dr. King, obviously, about ODFW's private forest accords, which is another new funding source. And then we will be, and have been talking also with Will Anderson about, and former Mayor Representative Gamba about the legislative session in 2025 and a transportation package and how that might be shaking out. And that is another place, obviously, that we'll be looking at. So we are fundraising for construction. We have full design funds, and then we'll have a little bit that will roll us into long lead items for construction. This is going to be 2025 is going to be probably maybe late 24 as we get ready for the legislative session, but 2025 is going to be when we hit the gas with this. We will probably try and do some events to cue things up for the legislative session come kind of end of the summer, early fall. And we'll be obviously working with the city on that and working with you. And then Dr. King is going to talk about this at length, but we have intensive equitable outreach planned in phase 2. We have a contract with the Clackamas chapter of Unite Oregon to really work with us and also with Confluence Environmental Center to do BIPOC specific tours, listening sessions, have a leadership team from, again, folks who are typically not part of these processes who can follow the project through the whole design phase. And this is a project that we also talk about. We talk about it a lot as a fish project because it is such a highly rated fish barrier and there's a lot of money attached to fish in some venues, but it's a people project. We're creating access to nature in a city center that's linked to transportation, that's linked to downtown. You've heard me say that many times. And that is also a huge part of this project. I would want to do this project if there were no salmon there. We've talked a little bit about the community science. We're also working with 3 tribes now on this project, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs both consider this among their usual and accustomed places and are both represented on the project technical advisory committee and in the future on the community engagement team when it gets going. We've also formed a relationship with Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla. While it's not their historical territory, we do have freshwater mussels in the impoundment that will need to go somewhere when the impoundment is drained. And the Umatilla Tribes runs the only freshwater mussel propagation facility in the Western US, and they want them for their propagation program. They don't have a propagation population of that species. So that's a great opportunity for us to kind of support their work, supporting our watershed statewide. So where we will continue to obviously look for leadership from the council is, we obviously know this project is going to require, and Joseph has been doing a great job of really managing the interdepartmental coordination within the city because it touches parks, it touches public works, it touches engineering, it touches planning, all of those interdepartmental aspects. Obviously, it fulfills the parks and the equity goals. We are creating a new natural area and we're doing it in a place that where there are a lot of historical inequities and current environmental justice issues. And the other places we will need kind of really a lot of help from the city is making sure that this is articulated as a top priority or the top priority whenever any of us are talking to, whether it's the legislature or the delegation or whoever it might be, that we all are on the same page and speaking the same language about what we need. Depending on how some of the competitive grants or appropriations work, sometimes it goes through different agencies, as you're well aware. Like obviously for federal highway, it almost always has to go through ODOT. Obviously with the congressionally directed spending, it had to go through the city, so it did. Those opportunities are also a way for the city to fund its needs, whether it's future management of the impoundment, how can we right the write those resources into these grants. We're going to be writing things that are going to have opportunities to plug big numbers into them for what the city needs to really not both do the project and also hopefully manage it in the future. And it takes staff time, and we're always trying to when we're writing grants, we're trying to write our partner staff time into it. I know American Rivers and ODOT see it the same way. So, and that is all I had for a quick update. And then we'll turn it over to Dr. King for that's blow by. I guess I'm the play-by-play, but she's the real commentary.
Well, thank you for having me. In fact, I was just talking about Kellogg Dam today. I am currently the Western Associated of Fish and Wildlife Agency, so WAFWA, is meeting at Skamania Lodge. So some of the people at Skamania Lodge right now were at the American Rivers Conference and remember my presentation. And I actually was talking with some of them and talking to some other folks about community engagement and communications for that. So I've been kind of talking about Kellogg Dam all day. It's interestingly enough, even though I'm at the WAFWA. So it's really gotten a lot of traction. It's gotten a lot of name recognition. I think from that national meeting when I was at American Rivers and that kind of congressional tour, I mean, I met people in Portland, like at Pew Memorial Trust, that said, I've never heard of this, but now I have. And now it's kind of getting that momentum and on people's radar. And I think you're right, Neil, 2025 will kind of be the year from this presentation, which I'll get started on. One of the people, there were several people in the room that are on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Interagency Task Force. And one of the things that they're looking for is kind of transformative projects. It's something like a 13 different federal agencies in this task force. And they mentioned, as we'll talk about people, one of the things that they realized that they've been too myopic. They've been so hyper-focused on fish, particularly anadromous fish, that they kind of haven't seen anything else. And they were kind of jarred into realizing hey, we can connect a high school to a middle school. This can really affect people. And that's kind of changing their definition and some of their metrics about what's transformative. So they're kind of you can sort of see wheels turning and people starting to look at this a little bit differently and not so narrowly, which is good. And it's good for Kellogg Dam. So hopefully it's all helping and moving. So I'll just get rolling. So what I always start all of these talks with that I've had is a definition of environmental justice. Now that is officially the federal definition as per the Environmental Protection Agency, which you can see that is a mouthful. So I usually do that to it. And so essentially, the thing to remember about environmental justice is that it's not new. It's from the first term of the Clinton administration, specifically 1994. So it is fully 30 years old now. There's an entire division of the EPA called environmental justice. But everyone thinks it's new, and it's the buzzword now because it got $60 billion. So now everybody wants to know what it is. And so when I teach classes in environmental justice, they're oversubscribed. And there's a lot of buzz around things like Kellogg because that's what they now represent. But it's sort of it's the same old thing, just repurposed a different way. So, since when is something 30 years old new? But that's what we're dealing with. And so, but I always make sure to frame it and make sure people understand what is environmental justice and why it's important in the context of something like a dam removal. So the keywords are the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people. Those are the key takeaways of what it means. And then these are just some quick facts. I'll just buzz through them quickly. So greater 50% of residents who live less than 2 miles from a toxic waste facility are people of color, that's the POC. Greater than half, so 53% live within 3 miles of the worst polluting coal plants are people of color. People below the poverty line, 35% increased higher burden of particulate matter emissions, specifically diesel usually, compared to the overall population, and 54% if you're Black. And then the final one is, this quote came from the gentleman that's called the father of environmental justice, the research he did after Katrina, that Black homeowners got essentially $8K less in grant money So, disasters strike equally, but the recovery is not equal. That's one of the things. And, when you look at that third one, the particulate matter emissions, that's basically asthma alleys, which you guys have a motorcycle cop running around on that I saw on my way here. Like, you've got several asthma alleys running through your city and town, Highway 99E, that, again, it mirrors your community that has been overwhelmingly people of color, and therefore they're going to be more overrepresented in particulate matter emissions. So, now one of the things that I do, and I've worked with ODFW with, and that's something that Joseph saw in the presentation that we had at Kellogg Dam, that was our Portland Regional Tour. So we are mandated to have a tour, a meeting and a tour in each congressional district annually. So we always are kind of a traveling circus. And so when we come to Portland, one of the things we used to do is kind of go to the sportsman show, and then that was it. That's it. And once I became the commissioner for Portland, I said, no, we're not doing that. We can still go to that show, but we're going to do something else. You're going to see more about what Portland is about, the nature of the city, if you will. That this is a city with 18 different endangered species within our city limits. You're going to come and see that and know it and understand it and engage with the half the population that you've been ignoring. So that is why we ended up at Kellogg Dam. And one of the things that I work with, what I call the fish boys, because the senior executive leadership of our fish division is all male. One of the things that they asked me is, how do we bring environmental justice into the fisheries? Like, how do they just, they're trying to get past crickets. They're trying to understand like what it is and how it can apply to them. And one of them, Neil already knows because he was instrumental in helping them, I think, getting the NOAA grant and others. He's the senior policy analyst and works a lot getting federal dollars to our state. And he created a map for me, meaning that demonstrates social disparity. Okay, and I always start with a statewide map, and you will see in a minute the Portland Metro map. And this map shows by color codes. So the darker, it used to be all blue, but he kind of made it different colors to make it easier. So the gradation of the high vulnerability is that deep orange. Okay, and then like the lighter orange is less, and then when you get to the blue, that's low vulnerability. So what social vulnerability scale is, this is GIS data, but what's made it more powerful and more salient today is that it's not just hydrological, it's hydrosocial. So you can load census data into it and layer that. And the 4 metrics that are always in the social vulnerability scale are of color, people of color, low income, low rates of home ownership, low rates of education. Always those 4. So people of color, low income, low rates of home ownership, low rates of education. Now, there's other ones that are also in it, for example, elderly, or English as a second language, or immigration status or thereof, newly integrated first generation, et cetera. There's a bunch of other things that can be loaded in there that can also measure it, but always, 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 it is those 4. Okay, and so I always show the state map to make sure that people understand, because everyone thinks that environmental justice is all about the cities. That's where all the diversity is, and that's where the disparity is. So it's a Portland problem. But so I show the state map to demonstrate that this is a state problem. That this is a nationwide problem. Systemic is just that, it's systemic. No one is immune. So if you look at our county right next door, does this work? Yeah, but it doesn't show.
It doesn't show on the screen.
So if you look at the county, right next door, Hood River County, that's a nice orange dot with a tiny little blue nubbin where kind of the trust fund, kite surfer, van life people live. Right up that way, okay? But the whole rest of the county, as you can see, has high social disparity and vulnerability, okay? And that's part of their unique history of what happened with the Japanese and then the Mexican immigrants who then replaced them. So that's their particular story. And it's interesting to note that they are the only county where it's the whole county. Everyone else kind of has some gradation. If you look at the poorest region of the state, that's the Klamath at the bottom. So it should not surprise you that the poorest region of the state also has an immense amount of environmental degradation. So that's where a lot of the federal dollars that we get and a lot of the focus go to the Klamath Basin, but they go upriver, the part of the Klamath that's in Oregon that is above the dams. So we get all this hype about the dams and we are all glad they're going away. But when we go to the Klamath, we don't even go there because the environmental degradation and the disparity that we are looking at is up by Klamath Lake and up in the drainages, the Sprague and the Williamson that come into Klamath Lake. And that's where the poverty is. You know, if you remember, she's now a rep again, or will be soon. The Drazen that ran for governor, and now she's going back into. She's from Merrill. She's from the California line down there in Klamath, one of the poorest regions of the state. And so that's kind of where we all go. That's our focus because we look at maps like this, and we have used map like this to direct federal dollars. So we've gotten millions to the Klamath. We've gotten millions to Hood River. If you look at other places, Coos Bay, on and on and on. So like basically it gives you a way to kind of point like a 2-year-old, like because where you see that disparity is where you see the environmental degradation. They mirror, they match. And same with health effects, same with urban canopy, it's all a loop. And so that's what this visualization of data gives us.
Dr. King?
Yes.
Are these census tracts or what? I mean, they're straight lines often, so I'm just trying to visualize how they.
Well, they're, what you're looking at is county maps as well.
County maps as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's the state map, so it's the state GIS data and then the federal census data
Okay.
merged. Yeah. And so this one shows you Portland Metro, okay? And one of the reasons that, again, and you saw this, Joe, I know in the presentation, is I really focused Metro, not Portland City, Portland Metro, the Tri-County. Because when you see Metro, of course you see East County and you know, East Multnomah County, all the names, Felony Flats and all the things you always hear about with all the struggle that's happening out Troutdale ways. But what you see when you do Portland Metro is you see Washington County and you see Cornelius. You see Forest Grove, you see Beaverton. Their metrics are just as bad as what we're seeing in East Multnomah County, and they're gonna have the exact same struggles with heat island effect, urban canopy issues, environmental degradation. Now, of the 5 watersheds of Portland, Fano, the one on the west side, the one over by Beaverton, we call it F for Fano, because they are failing, F for failing for Fano. The only of the 5 watersheds worse than Fano is the slough and the Superfund site. Okay, so and if you look at it visually, that's why they're over there in that degradation. They're over there in the disparity. So they're going to look exactly the same as some of the other poor regions up in the slough, but you can see why they're in struggle. Okay, so. Maybe you could point with the finger, but basically, I know you can see yourself, Milwaukie. There's hoping you know where you are. But basically, Milwaukie, as we'll talk about as we go through the presentation, is changing. Milwaukie used to be a dark orange dot. It's now the lighter orange, and it's probably getting closer to blue as things move along. But it used to be the very blue of kind of Selwood and the Moorlands, and then orange in Milwaukie, with the difference between the city and the county line. It was a very stark gradation. It's changing since the max has come, since a lot of other gentrification has come. But it used to be like much more visual stark. But you can still see that there's a difference between the two. And so when you're north, when you're in, say, the blue, your watershed looks like that, which is the Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden, the only botanical garden on the West Coast in the top 10. It is stunning beyond belief. I mean, it's worth all the hype. And one of the other reasons that was chosen by Portland Environmental Services for restoration, it's one of the few places where the chum salmon come back. So within there and then across the street at Reed Canyon, like you could just sort of walk and see the baby salmon, like they visit you and visit the students. And, I mean, you kind of forget that you're in Portland city limits, because it is just, so much has been done. It is so beautiful. Everyone, you just look at it and you smile, you just can't believe it. When you live on the other side of the line, that's what your creek looks like. What Neil just described, something that's been there since Lincoln, okay? Something that nobody bothered to remove, something that people at Pew don't even know is there. You know, it's out of sight, it's ignored, it's overlooked. And again, this shows again for you, Counselor, this is the census tract data, but shown specifically in the Kellogg region. And you can see right where the dam is right where the orange dot is. It correlates exactly. And you can do this, you know, I'm not trying to pick on poor little old Milwaukie. You can do this in Detroit. You can do this anywhere in the country, rural or urban. You know, we're gonna be in the Klamath later this month. And they've already created the maps for the Klamath. It's exactly the same. No matter where you go, yes.
So I thought the dot was just like, here's Kellogg Dam, but you're saying that's the color, that's the gradation dam is different than right there. Okay.
Yeah, so the dot is Kellogg, but it is also in.
It is also.
orange. Yep. Yep, and you look just north and see where that blue is, that's Johnson Creek and Crystal Springs Rhododendron Garden and Reed College, and where you can have, you know, a water fountain for your dog. Very, very, very different. And I mean, literally, it's 3 miles away. And I'm sure you've probably been on the tours with Neil. You can stand at the mouth of one and see the mouth of the other. They're that close, yet they're a world away. And it's because where Johnson Creek is, and at least where it comes out, there's other problems with Johnson Creek. I'm not saying that they've still got their own struggles, but you can see that they're on a roll. They get $5 million out of whack. I mean, they get a whole different, because it comes to a neighborhood that's engaged, that's wealthy, that knows what river restoration is, that understands the power of nature, that wants a tree canopy. It's a very different vibe than people who just don't have a clue. Like, I mean, you got to start at the beginning. And that's one of the many things that Neil and I talk about with the community engagement, is that, you know, you can't just slap somebody upside the head with the dam. Like, you've got to explain, like, why is it even there? People don't even know it's there. And like, you really got to start at the beginning and really start with some explaining, and then explain the benefits about, say, toxins, about, say, temperature, etc. Okay, and make it much more than, I mean, it's great for fish, 100%, and lamprey even better, but you've got to make it about people. You've also got to, when you storytell, and, you know, like, I got this great quote today, is like, art is the parallel way of knowing. Like when you do it that way, like, you've got to give people something, that not something that's tangential and they don't understand, like the bad chum salmon, like what? So this gives you, hopefully the answer to your question. So what this is showing is, again, in that same map, what they did in the Kellogg Creek watershed, specifically the 14.5 acres that Neil is talking about that will be restored, that shows you how they loaded in the census tract data. So they specifically loaded it in, and you can specifically see the colors and the gradations on the map and why. And then this one brings me to our next point, meaning we know Milwaukie is gentrifying. We have all the data, whether you use it visually, whether you look at the numbers, whichever way you look at it, whether it's because the MAC's coming through, whether it's because people who can no longer afford to live in Selwood and East and Westmoreland are flying across the border. You know, like, there's all sorts of reasons why this is happening, but it is 100% happening. And this just brings it home in terms of this is like the beginning of the displacement. This is exactly what happened in Mississippi. It's exactly what happened in Darlington. It's exactly what's happened all over the planet. Where we had our meeting for American Rivers was in Southeast DC, and in the Anacostia neighborhood, right on the Anacostia River. I remember precisely what that neighborhood was like. And it was not a place where nonprofits had their meetings and then you walked to the little restaurants and had your happy hour. I mean, it was a place that the cabbies would not take you there and drop you off. They were scared to go, let alone drop you off. Okay, so this is a phenomenon that is happening all over the nation, over and over and over on repeat, that when things like infrastructure, like you rebuild, remove a dam and rebuild a watershed and make this amazing community green space that will potentially connect a middle school to a high school, the people that are there don't benefit. The people that are there get displaced. And they get, all of a sudden, like, here comes the brewery and the fancy coffee house and the New Seasons and the Trader Joe's. You know, I mean, like, so it's a drumbeat. You know, I've lived in Portland since 1997, and I watched the interstate maps get built. And that we are chapter and verse. That is what happened to that neighborhood. Like, you watched it happen. You watched all the renters, the poor, low-income renters get displaced. In fact, like, it was a literal displacement, because usually where the interstate max was built, it displaced and destroyed a whole bunch of housing. Just like the I-5 interstate went through in the first wave and displaced and destroyed a whole bunch of housing. And then as that went through, then that means rents went up. And that means landlords had all sorts of leverage to kick out the low-income people. And then there's now a New Seasons there. It used to be the Albertsons where you bought chitlins. I'm not kidding. Like, I watched all of that happen out my window. I watched that neighborhood get completely effaced. If you go there now, you would have no recollection of what it used to look like. You would have no idea. They're now trying to put up like these murals and posters that show a bunch of Black people that used to live there. And it's just like, what? You know, I mean, but they're all gone. That's, you know, there's a few names, like they've named some of the famous people that were there, like, for example, like people that are part of the Vanport Mosaic now, and those families that were displaced from Vanport to there, you know, so there's family names around, but there's not the families. It's all upper middle income white hipsters. And it's because property values, once developers went in, the property values went up by 90%. No one could afford, even if you afford your home, you couldn't afford the taxes to stay there. So it's a complete effacement. Like, and if you just, I don't know, you're moving from Houston now and you're relocating to Portland, you just think this is this nice, lovely, wonderful place. I'd like to live here. You have no idea what happened. It's all just completely gone. And, you know, I think the fear is that this has happened all over the country, and this kind of place, it could happen here. I mean, you're no different. You're no different at all. In fact, you're exactly the same. You've already got the max, and you've already got making the decisions in terms of like bringing in the high-end grocery stores. It'll just take you right there.
See our new apartment developments.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like where it's like the boutique on the bottom and the cutesy lofts on the
Oh,
top.
just the cost of them.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Like
The cost of them.
you know, just the price of milk. I'll never forget, like, I haven't even looked at like the waterfront side. It's just, it just, you can't believe.
You don't want to go there.
And it's like, you're like, Milwaukie? Like, are you for real?
Well, I mean, the one thing that's different here than, say, on Interstate is that our downtown, nobody was living in.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody was actually displaced from our downtown. Now, will that happen more with moving out from downtown? You know, will we see pressures on apartment buildings and housing along Lake Road and along the creek?
I think it's 100%. How would you not?
Yeah.
I think there's also something that comes up for me when we think about, you know, like that I feel like is really important for all of us to kind of work through in the design and community engagement process, that which is, you know, obviously the watershed. I am not a housing and anti-displacement expert, you know, that is not my area of expertise. But when I say, you know, when I think about we are creating a new natural area, and initially it's like, hey, that's great, that's good. When Metro developed the 2019 bond measure, they had kind of a lot of community group that I was part of as a representative of the Watershed Council from people around the region who were kind of facilitating a broad set of conversations around the region about what do you want to see in the bond measure? Would you rather have more money go to this thing or that thing or local share? And we were running a series that were really very pretty targeted at audiences of color. And we had a couple of them over at the Harmony campus next to Three Creeks at the community college. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear from people of color was that those are white spaces. If I go there, somebody is going to call the cops on me. And then that was before 2020 and before the Christian Cooper kind of very publicized story about birding while black in Central Park, you know. And I think it is really incumbent on us all as we go through this process of creating this new natural area to make sure we do absolutely everything possible to make sure that everybody feels safe and welcome there. And it's usually people of color not feeling safe in what they consider to be white spaces.
And this is just I think these are my last two slides. So the Invest in Oregon, that was again through ODFW, why we're getting so much money in terms of like going after all the infrastructure and jobs money and the IRA money. And I think it just talks about Justice 40, which is the Justice 40 is 40% of the federal investment for climate and infrastructure goes to communities, or it's marginalized, disadvantaged communities. But yes, it is about ownership of space, absolutely. And sadly, it just comes down to money. Like who can, like, you know, once it starts to tip and once it becomes white, well then like suddenly, you know, like, in fact, I watched this happen in Albina and Mississippi. Like as it became like more and more hipster and white, well, people started complaining about the Black churches and their music and it was too loud. And it was like, you know, like, and suddenly, like you said, they didn't feel safe in their spaces. And it's sort of like, we're just going to church. Like, we've always done this. Like, what's going on? You know, and so I think it really is about like really sitting and nutting out and thinking like, for example, do you put moratoriums on folks that own their home and they're just in retirement on their fixed income? But when now suddenly their property is worth 900 times it was, you price them out like, you know, they're paying more in taxes than they paid in the whole mortgage. You know, so that's why they get displaced. And like, there's got to be clever ways around that. There's got to be ways that we can think about so that you don't just efface. Because it just seems that, and so much of that disparity map, I think, is driven by that. It just seems to be the American way. Like, we just come as a horde in mass and disease and shoot and like rape and pillage and get rid of everybody that was there and then rename everything and build it new. That just seems to be a theme. And it just seems to be what we've done for our entire history. And to me, it's like, you know, the definition of stupid is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Like, we know it, we see it, we've done it. Within my lifetime, I can think of, you know, 100 examples. It's sort of like, if we know all of this, can't we come up with some solutions? Can't we do something different? You know, like we know this path. We're really good at it. It's like, best in the world, probably. So, you know, I think that's what to me is so horrifying is that, and, you know, people always ask me, they asked me at the American Rivers Conference, I said, you know, in the spot that we are standing, this happened. So, and, you know, people like, that's like the big rub is how do we not, like when we see it and we know, and we have all of this living experience and we have all of this historical record, like, you know, like if you look at old Multnomah County meetings, they're horrifying in terms of like, put that over there, that's where the Black people live. I mean, this was stuff on record, like they purposely set up disadvantaged communities and then coded them in there and stuck them in there and redlined them and all sorts of things happen. Like we know this happens, we have all the evidence, we have all the ways to make a different decision. The question is, will we?
I think one of the things that the city of Milwaukie has, and I actually had a picture taken from it on my quick update slides, but I forgot to point this out, is Milwaukie actually has a really good tool on their website, on the city website. The Branch Out Milwaukie tool is, I think, the beginning of that in the sense in being able to look at tree canopy by census tract and income and air quality and urban heat island effect. And when it comes down to, you know, I think I kind of talked a lot with Natalie when she was working with the city and with Peter over, you know, when there is a urban forestry planting plan, tells us where to plant trees to benefit people who haven't been, you know, have all, you know, are in the red dots. I think it's a different color on.
Can you stop on that one?
Oh, sure.
So that's a really powerful tool for targeting some of that work. And
your tech man has copies of this, so, and then we share this data, like, you know, we create it, but I mean, like, we made big maps and we left them behind with North Clackamas. Like, nothing about this is proprietary, it's just GIS data making maps. And we have at ODFW, I think we have 400 licenses, so we're happy to make them for whoever and give them to whoever. So don't worry about that. Did you have a question about those specific?
Well, I just was looking at the colors and the creek and coming back to the dam and the restoration of the 13 acres or
Right.
15 acres or whatever. Is there an impact on, I don't see an immediate connection to displacement, but is there something we should be doing in terms of, I don't know, connecting the schools obviously is a great idea, but should we be thinking about the broader watershed beyond the 13 acres and sort of how we address the restoration and stuff? Yeah.
Short answer is yes. The long answer is there's a couple of things that I think we've been kind of talking about, but that haven't come up yet because we're just not far enough along in the design. So there's obviously a lot of apartment complexes around the impoundment, and making sure that when we develop the plan, the really fine-grained plan for the impoundment, especially when it comes to who has access out their back door through a trail, that those apartment complexes and the people who are not homeowners, who can't afford lakefront, what is currently lakefront property, also get access, that it's not just from other public spaces and not just from one side of the tracks, or the proverbial tracks. I think that, I think looking down the future, when we look at how do we link this to points further east, again, close to Three Creeks, close to 82nd, where we know we have another really strong equity overlay and another major public natural area. There is potential. I think, Lisa, when you were on the Watershed Council board, I think you heard Mark Fitzsimons talk a couple of times about we could have a whole corridor that runs east into those areas that gives people access. And I think that is another good project for when this one is done,
Yeah.
And
I think this map shows it quite well.
Yeah.
Absolutely, because this map, I always give people the test, the heat dome happened, 2020 heat dome? It's 90% of the deaths came from one spot. Can you figure out which spot? That same spot has no tree canopy. And the disparity, Portland's actually leads the nation in disparity. So one side of Portland is 56% tree canopy, the other side is 21. You can figure out which one is which just by looking at that map. That 2.5 times disparity leads the nation. And within a city, that much disparity in tree canopy
Oh, really? Oh,
leads
interesting.
the nation.
Wow.
And again, and to give it scale, 21% is New York City. So you got one part of Portland that's New York City, you got one part of Portland that's Portland. So, this map, to me, visualization of data, the fact that you can point at it is so significant. And when you look at Beaverton and it looks just like East Multnomah County, they're gonna have exactly the same factors. They're gonna have a heat dome. They're gonna have environmental degradation.
Well, and can you go back again to the other one?
Which one, the Kellogg one?
Watershed one? Yeah. So that, just something I'll point out to you, that
This one?
that's fine. That orange block along 205, which is, I don't know where it actually, it's how much of it's in Milwaukie versus in our
Right.
UGMA,
Yeah.
unincorporated county.
Yeah, sure.
But I sit on, one of the other hats I wear is to be on the North Clackamas Parks and Rec District Advisory Committee. And it's something I've called out there several times, is that stretch between 82nd and 205. There is 0 parks. It is probably the most, I don't know this for sure, but I am guessing it is the most densely populated part of Clackamas County.
I'm sure you're probably right. And
But north of the Clackamas Town Center, it's just all
it's
apartments.
just tracked. And also, again, that's an asthma alley. That's the particulate matter emissions.
Yeah.
If you look at what lines highways, it's overwhelmingly poor, BIPOC, rental, low income, and they're getting asthma. Literally, they're getting asthma from all that particulate emissions. So it is, and if you look at where Beaverton's sitting, it's sitting right on 217. It's exactly, the pattern repeats.
But I appreciate what I think what you're saying, Dr. King, has two parts of the message. There's how do we invest in those orange areas to, reduce that disparity? But then I hear you, Mayor, that we wouldn't, to maybe directly be displacing as in,
bulldozer,
bulldozing,
yeah.
but it's the market pressure that then as you make those areas go from orange to blue, they become more desirable, the prices of the land grows up, those folks who have those rental apartments get priced out. And so that's where I think to the
That's
whole,
the pattern.
don't do the same thing over and over again,
How do you-
expect a different
how do you
result. How do we think about,
Yeah.
and what levers do we have to pull to think about those market forces, to not, and I think the answer is not, don't make the investments that make these better places to live, because that would just
Right,
further
yeah,
the disparities. But
yeah.
it's how do we do that and
With policy.
Yeah, exactly.
protect.
And I think the other part of it is like when I buy kind of training on this stuff and, obviously coming from like the nonprofit side of it where we're not setting policy and we're not, but is what we can do and what we want to do in this process is the 2 Ps in the 4 Ps of an equity lens, people in place but who's part of the process and who has power in that process. And that is why we are really investing in the community engagement side of this project in the way that we are, so that because we know that when it comes to, who gets a trail access point to this new area or who doesn't, we know who we will hear from, whether we go reach out to them and make the process easy for them or not. And so that's kind of the part that we can do on the process side to really shape that. But yeah, I think, again, not being a gentrification displacement expert, I think, it's really not how do you not improve the conditions, but how do you improve the conditions and not have the displacement.
Help people stay there,
Exactly.
enjoy the improvements.
Exactly. Like they suffered through all the bad times, and now when it's finally good, they get kicked out because they can't afford it. Because you're right. I think that's what's heartbreaking as you look. Those people are so vulnerable, and they're going to be the first to go because they're vulnerable, and somebody else has the power because they're the owner, and so they can determine like I'm going to sell, and that because that's now going to come prime habitat for a human. Not just the connectivity. It's no longer going to be by this silt thing that like you sink to in your waist. We all know what that number looks like. With the grocery cart sticking up, and it's not going to look like that.
Yeah.
It's going to be really freaking awesome, and you're going to have your kid be able to walk from their middle school to their high school.
Yeah,
That's going to be fantastic. That's going to have a premium. And to me, what makes it flip, what it seems like what I've seen every time, what makes it flip is the developers. It's when you get that commercial aspect into it. And that's when, that's what happened at 100% to Mississippi. If you've not seen the book Portland Mess, the little coffee table book, it's really, really cool. And the guy who did it, got his degree. He's like an artist and a geologist, and all of a sudden he kind of fused all his skills into map making, cartography. And so, but he trained formally in GIS. And it was pre-pandemic, and he was just starting to put his toe into visualization of data. And the 2 things that he visualized that like were really kind of prescient, if you will, homelessness and redlining. And like how he showed how it moved over decades, it's really just a stunning visual. And, and he said, as it's moving in terms of Albina, Mississippi neighborhood, it's like, and by the way, property values increased by 90 times once the investors and the developers moved in, and that's what made it flip. And now it's like, literally there is a spa hotel being built on Alberta. That used to be the heart of the Black neighborhood. Because that was where they were redlined. That was the only place where Black people could live. And now when you walk those streets, because I'm there all the time because I live in North and Northeast, you don't see any Black people except the ones that you see on the murals and the posters and their names up there. So it's just, to me, that's the key is the developers. It's like that commercial aspect. If you just kept it in the hands of just us just owning our house, that's a whole different thing than.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, Neil's right, there are huge apartment complexes on both sides of the street.
Uh-huh.
And some in Milwaukie and some not in Milwaukie.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I'd love to have a future conversation about what tools we have to control how they raise rents. I mean, once they're now in front of a new park or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, how do we, yeah.
Because that's what happened, like, again, right? The people that knew, and they knew it was coming because the max, just like here, came right by their houses. So that means those landowners, like, they just saw dollar signs. They knew that they had property that was a premium. And now now it's like condos, line the max.
The other conversation I also had about just kind of preventing displacement that with Natalie, it was going back to branch out Milwaukie and looking at where are there the highest rates of people of color home ownership in Milwaukie because having a bunch of tree, and again looking at that for that as a place to target for tree planting, because that is having decent sized trees on your street adds about 7.5% to property value. And if we're saying, hey, we want to help people of color stay in their homes and build intergenerational wealth, that could be one way to give that a little bit of a boost. I don't know if that data, I'm sure that data exists somewhere.
And the other thing I think to look at is we don't have a lot of it, but where's municipal owned land around these watersheds? So what's the overlay of parcels that we have and.
Yeah, I should know the answer to this, so sorry, but I was wondering about when that goes away, what part, like, is most of that Milwaukie that's owned under the?
Almost all of it. There is a little bit of corner of David Cole's property that goes into the impoundment, and a little bit that is owned by Miramonte Apartments, just on the other
Oh,
side.
yeah.
On the
Just-
Laughlin
On the
side.
Laughlin
Yeah.
side, but most of it's is municipal.
Right, and I'm not sure what the status of that, that kind of agreement between the city and Metro around acquisition of those subsurface parcels was. But the rest of it's owned by Milwaukie.
Okay.
And also, like, I think I love your 4 Ps. I wrote that down because power actually, it really is, it's interesting because I'm a commissioner and I always look all the time, like, who comes before the commission? Or who calls me up? Or who knows what lever to pull? Like, who knows how to find me? Like, and it's interesting, even like down to like, we had literally showed up in a school bus, the middle school kids, and they came to talk about workout. And like, and they came and they were so super cute, but exactly the same demographic.
Yeah.
From exactly like a neighborhood like Selwood that knew exactly what to do. And their teacher, like, somehow knew one of the people that was, like, involved in the thing. And then they had a civics lesson on, this is how you come and testify. And these are your time limits. And this is what you, and they did a beautiful job, but you realize, like, who isn't here? I always just kind of, it's just so, it's
Well,
like, who doesn't know?
Access.
Access, and that's where that power comes in, that P of power, because, and that's something that Neil and I struggle with, like community engagement, like you've got to get people out there and understanding, and so they know to find their senator, or they know to make sure that you're involved in whenever you guys change zoning or whatever, because those people in, say, Brentwood, Darlington, or in Mississippi, they weren't involved in that. Whereas the neighborhoods that fought back in Southwest, they fought against it and fought against the zoning, and they weren't disbanded. Like, those neighborhoods are all still intact and they're doing the thing. So, and that Portlandness, like I said, that book, it's got so many other fun things, like, bikes and colors of houses. It's got all these things that you can see they're just sort of dabbling in this visualization of data. But that's just become more and more powerful now that you can fuse it with census tract data and LiDAR and all the things that are happening now.
So I think it's exciting that you have got Unite Oregon in this team, because I do think how we reach those people is the struggles we have over and over again, how we reach the people we don't reach, and going back to, I will say the Parks District is a perfect example of this. They hear from people to our south in the Oak Grove, Jennings Lodge area. That's where all their investment is. That's a very white neighborhood. But that's the people who are the squeaky wheels. The people that are in the unserved orange splotch up there, they don't know. They're not engaged and nobody's reaching out to them. In fact, the Parks District is doing a system planning effort right now. And that's a conversation I will bring up at their meeting next week, actually. Is it, how are you getting into these neighborhoods and have you found partners to help you have those conversations?
Like I know when I present this one, I know it's time to go, but I present this to my students in the environmental justice courses. Whose river gets restored? Like,
Yeah.
who ends up looking like Crystal Springs and who ends up looking like Milwaukie? Like, who knows? Like you said, like who's engaged with parks? Who knows to call the center? Who comes before ODIP? Like, who knows, like, the fish boys and can make you a map? Who knows that? Like, and so much of it comes down to those P's and the power.
Yeah.
And that's what I think, this NOAA grant that Neil did, congratulations to Neil. The 15 million, the biggest grant ever and all that. And lots of people were harping and complaining about how, we didn't get any money because they all went to Kellogg, that kind of stuff. But it's the first grant ever where they built community engagement in the grant. And now NOAA will hopefully, at the national meeting, I met the NOAA people and they want it in all grants moving forward.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so, I think that is kind of the way, because you're right, like so much of it happens because people just don't know. They literally just don't know.
Yeah.
And so they're sitting ducks for somebody to come and steamroll.
Well, Dr. King, thank you so much. Neil, thank you. This was
Thank you
really
very much.
wonderful
Very
presentation.
informative, thanks.
It's awesome.
And like I said, that's all shareable. You have a copy, your techie guy.
Our techie guy. His name's Nick. He's not a fish guy, but he's a math guy.
So, and if ever Neil can reach out to me, like via maps, and we're happy to share.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, I guess we're adjourned until 6 o'clock, regular session.
All right.
Well, you're
Have you been cheating? Have you been?
I've been great. How are you doing?
All right.
Oh my God, yeah.